The scariest 911 calls are not always made by victims. Sometimes the person crying into the phone is the one who caused the blood on the floor. Sometimes the shaking voice is hiding a plan, a lie, or a secret police will not see until much later. This is the kind of true crime that stays under your skin. Top 5 911 calls made by the killers themselves. Before the end, one call will begin as a husband begging for help, but collapse into a staged scene. Another will sound like grief so real that officers first believed it, until the dead man's own marriage exposed everything. Number 5 begins inside a quiet Indiana home. In November 2016, Brandi Worley made a 911 call that froze even experienced listeners. Her voice was strangely flat as she told dispatchers that she had stabbed herself and killed her 2 children, 7-year-old Tyler and 3-year-old Charlie. The house should have been filled with bedtime sounds, little voices, doors creaking in the dark. Instead, it became a place almost impossible to process. Brandi's husband had recently filed for divorce, and the family was already breaking apart behind closed doors. But no one expected the breaking point to end with 2 children dead in their own home. What makes this call so chilling is not just the violence, it is the calmness after it. There is no mass stranger, no mystery intruder, just the mother calling emergency services from the place where she destroyed the lives she was supposed to protect most. Later, Brandi Worley pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and received 120 years in prison. But no sentence can fully explain the horror of that call. A house still, 2 children gone, and a mother's voice sounding beyond remorse. Number 4 starts like a heroic emergency. A husband calls 911. He says his wife has been attacked. He says he shot the man responsible. On the surface, Mark Winger's call sounded like a nightmare that ended with protection. Donna Winger was dead. Roger Harrington, a shuttle driver who had recently driven Donna home from the airport, was also dead. Mark's version placed him as the survivor, the defender, the man who walked into an attack and did the only thing he could do. But investigators noticed pieces that did not sit right. The timing, the connections, the shape of the scene, the way Roger Harrington had been pulled into the story. Slowly, the rescue narrative began to rot from the inside. Police later concluded that Mark Winger had killed both Donna and Roger, staging one murder to explain another. It was not just a plea for help, it was part of the performance. The emergency line became a stage, and the caller tried to write himself as the grieving hero. Years later, Mark Winger was convicted, and the call that once sounded like panic became the opening move of a man trying to turn murder into self-defense. Number 3 is loud in a different way. Not loud because of screams, but because of what comes after the gunfire. In 2012, Shayna Hubers called 911 after shooting her boyfriend, Ryan Poston, 6 times in Kentucky. She claimed self-defense. She presented herself as the person who had survived danger. But the details became darker with every layer. Ryan was a young attorney, and his life ended inside a home that suddenly turned from ordinary to irreversible. 6 shots are not a blur. 6 shots leave rhythm, spacing, decisions, and aftermath. When Shayna spoke to authorities, the case took on a disturbing emotional texture. Her own call and later police interview became key pieces in understanding what happened. Investigators and jurors had to look past the first version and ask what the room itself was saying. The blood, the wounds, the number of shots, the timeline, the behavior after the trigger was pulled. This one became tangled in control, anger, and a relationship already toxic. Shayna Hubers was convicted of murder. The chill comes from the gap between what she wanted the world to hear and what the evidence eventually said. Number 2 begins with grief. A young wife calls 911 crying that her husband has been shot. The victim is Army Sergeant Tyrone Hassel III, a man with a uniform, a family, and a life that should not have ended in the cold darkness outside a home. Kemia Hassel sounded devastated. To anyone hearing only those first moments, the scene feels like a sudden tragedy. A husband attacked, a wife shattered, emergency help racing toward violence already done. But this is where the story twists colder. Investigators later discovered that Kemia was not simply the grieving widow she appeared to be. She had helped plan Tyrone's murder with her lover, Jeremy Cuellar. It was intimate betrayal, the kind that hides behind shared photos, military ceremonies, family smiles, and ordinary routines. Tyrone did not just walk into danger from the outside world. The danger had grown close to him, quietly, where he should have been safest. Kemia's 911 call is haunting because emotion can be real and deceptive at the same time. Tears do not always mean innocence. Panic does not always mean surprise. Sometimes the person sounding broken is broken because the plan has finally become real. Kemia Hassel was convicted, and the call that first looked like a widow's desperate cry became one of the most chilling killer 911 calls because it showed how grief can be used as camouflage. Number 1 is the call that hides inside a medical emergency. Kevin West, a former fire battalion chief, called 911 and said his wife, Marcy, was having a seizure. This was not a caller unfamiliar with emergencies. This was a man trained around crisis, urgency, response, and control. When someone like that calls for help, people listen differently. They assume he knows what he is seeing. They assume the story begins with illness, not violence. But Marcy West's death did not stay inside that explanation. Evidence later showed she died from asphyxia and blunt neck trauma. A jury found Kevin West guilty of murdering her. Suddenly, the 911 call changed shape. The words about a seizure no longer sounded like confusion. They sounded like a cover placed over something physical, silent, and brutal. Picture the room after the call. The air heavy, the floor too still, emergency response moving toward a scene already being framed before they arrived. A medical emergency can look natural from a distance, but bodies remember what happened. Injuries speak, patterns speak, and when the truth surfaced, the call became a reminder that experience does not equal honesty. Sometimes the person who knows how emergencies work also knows how to disguise one. These 5 cases are chilling because every call begins with the same promise: help is needed. But behind that promise, the truth is already bleeding through. Brandi Worley did not hide what she had done, and that emptiness made the call unforgettable. Mark Winger tried to turn himself into the hero of a staged scene. Shayna Hubers claimed fear after firing 6 shots. Kemia Hassel wrapped betrayal in the sound of grief. Kevin West used the shape of a medical crisis until the evidence broke it apart. That is why 911 calls made by killers themselves are so disturbing in true crime. They force us to hear the moment when reality is still being negotiated, when the killer's voice reaches the dispatcher before the full truth reaches the world. And once you know what really happened, you can never hear those calls the same way again.
Welcome to Crime Reveals.